Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I'm Senior Vice President at Tier Memorial Hermann Hospital, and I'm Professor of Health Information Sciences at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. Today's program will be about recovery from Hurricane Ike. As you know, Hurricane Ike affected Houston and the surrounding area on September the 13th, 2008. Many people with disabilities were caught up in the storm, and it really was a disaster for many of those people. In fact, nearly 3,000 people with disabilities were evacuated from the Gulf Coast area as a precaution prior to Hurricane Ike. So we'll talk about the aftermath of Hurricane Ike on this show. I have a question which we'll answer by the end of the show, and that is, what is the surge zone? What is the surge zone? We'll answer that question before today's program ends. I'm going to introduce two wonderful guests to talk about the subject right after this break. So thanks for being with us today. I'm Lex Frieden, and I'm going to introduce two great guests to talk about Hurricane Ike recovery as it relates to people with disabilities. I'm glad to have on the show today Wendy Wilkinson. Wendy is from the Southwest Disability and Business Technical Assistance Center. Wendy, you direct the program there. Can you tell me how long you've been with that program?
Yes, I've been with the program 15 years now, and we provide training and technical assistance and resources to promote proactive compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And I should mention that the program is a part of the ILRU program at TIER.
Yes, it is.
Our second guest today is Carlos Saez. Carlos is the proprietor of Freedom Wheels, a company that provides equipment, driving adaptations, and other assistance to people with disabilities in the community. Carlos, welcome to Focus on Abilities.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Carlos, since Hurricane Ike, you've been busy with your clients and with others. Can you tell me how you got involved?
Well, you know, after the hurricane went through the city, it was somewhat clear to some of my guys that there were people that had been a little bit left out or could not be reached, and we thought they needed help. At the same time, though, the communications opened up with the group that Wendy and I believe you are involved with, and so things developed pretty fast, actually, in terms of creating a scenario and some mechanisms to be able to reach these people. And we decided to use our database initially to contact people that was in the immediate area affected by the hurricane, particularly the southeast side of town. And there was a business association type of agreement created with the I'm sorry if I don't remember the name correctly. I think University of Texas Science Health Center and ILRU. A survey was developed and a website was put up, and immediately we started to put people on telephones contacting.
So your immediate concern and that of your staff was to find out how the people who use service on a regular basis survived and managed after the storm. Wendy, the hurricane actually had power down for people in the region for days and days, and in some cases weeks and weeks. The storm itself didn't apparently affect a lot of people with disabilities who were on the coast because they were evacuated prior to the storm. And those who sheltered in place, I mean, we heard about some people having to go to the hospital, but many people managed to shelter in place. The real challenge for people came trying to survive the power outages and difficulties getting food and water and ice after the storm. Is that what you found?
Yeah, that's correct. And we found a lot of stories where there were people with disabilities that used power chairs, for example. We found one woman, actually through Carlos's company that he provided services to, that was having to go charge her wheelchair at a McDonald's for 8 hours a day. We found people that used respirators and depended on diesel and generators to power their equipment. And we found that they were running out of diesel fuel and were actually in life-threatening situations. So we found a lot of people with some real immediate critical needs that we were able to help resolve.
I recall the day after the storm calling a friend of mine who actually breathes with the assistance of a electrically powered ventilator, and she had fortunately planned ahead and had a gasoline powered generator to run the electricity just enough to run her breathing device. However, she was running out of gasoline.
Yes.
And that was compounded by the fact that many of the gasoline stations didn't have power, so they couldn't pump gas. These are issues that sometimes you don't think about ordinarily. People sure got some almost life-threatening experiences with that after this storm, didn't they?
Oh, yes, they did. I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the problem was being able to find the people and be able to communicate with them. Fortunately, you know, some people, we had their cell phone contact information, but other than that, I mean, it was often difficult to find people, and we're still finding people that were displaced by the storm in shelters that have lost everything. And I'm afraid that recovery is going to be a long-term process for a lot of those people.
Well, we'll come back to that in a second. Just, you know, in the hours and days immediately following that storm, one of the issues became food quickly, because power was off in people's refrigerators and their freezers, and all their food spoiled, and they needed to get food. Fortunately, the pods were open to distribute food and spread around in the neighborhoods around town and the surrounding community. However, many people with disabilities don't have independent transportation. They were stuck at home anyway, and they weren't able to get the food from the pods. Carlos, did you run into any of those people when you were making your calls to your clients?
Yes. We had several instances where that was necessary to provide some sort of transportation or even delivery in some cases. Some of the people that we were able to contact right away, and the main issue we ran into was the people that had damage to their wheelchair, electric chairs, and which is a secondary part of our business, and also the people with the vans, that they had problems because the batteries had either water, particularly in the surge areas as we call. They had damage to their vehicles. They couldn't just get out of there. A lot of folks that live alone, and their assistants could not get to help them. And the batteries on their nebulizer respirator units, sometimes the batteries on the wheelchairs, they become expire, and we were able to contact them again using a database that's pretty extensive and pretty detailed in terms of knowing where they are, and having the ability to go to these people helped a lot. I just think that, as Wendy said, it's a problem that is going to continue. It's going to take a while to manage. But I also think that the effort of all the people involved in the recovery project could become a blueprint, if you will, for things in the future. I was talking to someone in Chile that is very involved in the disability movement, and of course Chile is a country known to be prone to catastrophes such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and that sort of thing. And we forward the copy of the survey, and they really liked it because it really gives a glimmer or a glimpse of what needs to be done and how the cooperation between a well-funded institution and private enterprise can pull together, use the databases that exist with the correct observation to HIPSA guidelines and so on, and reach people out there, because that's the logic thing to do. Otherwise, you can have everything you need to help the people, but if you can't get to them, or if you don't know where they are, then you just got a lot of goodies, but nowhere to go with them.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, let's look at some of the demographics. In Houston, there are approximately 500,000 people with disabilities. That's the greater Houston metropolitan area. 19,000 people are registered and qualified to use the Metrolift paratransit special transportation system for people with disabilities. I understand that approximately 14,000 people had registered before Hurricane Ike with the transportation assistance via the 211 system. And for those of you watching who have disabilities or other special needs, it's important always to make sure you're registered with 211, because that can save your life by getting you out prior to disaster, but 14,000 people were on that list. Now, we know that approximately 3,000 people were evacuated, so the city and the county and the other cooperating entities did a great job getting people out before the storm. They used Metrolift, they used Metro buses, they used local transportation, they used taxis, they used ambulances. And as far as we know at this point, nobody with a disability who wanted to be evacuated prior to that event lost their lives, and everybody got out. That's great. We had good planning, and all the local public services worked together and got people out before the storm. After the storm, however, was a different subject, because we didn't plan entirely on having on being without power. Most people are prepared to shelter in place for 3 days. Power was out in most places for twice that long. So people had issues with basic needs. Food, water, and because the power was out and this is a hot area, they lost their air conditioning. Many people with respiratory conditions were threatened because they had no ventilation. These were issues that we're just now beginning to recover from. But the long-term impacts that you all are talking about, I think, are the things that we need to focus on and get better about. We clearly weren't prepared to deal with all of the aftermath. And that includes social service agencies that are affected by the storm, who are accustomed to taking care of folks, and their agencies were affected, the people who work for them. I mean, Wendy, did you see that happen?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the people that do provide services directly for people with disabilities, they had staff that were evacuated, so they weren't fully staffed. Their offices sustained damage, so they couldn't open up in order to provide the services that were needed. So that was factored into being part of the difficulty in meeting the needs of people with disabilities who we know were stranded out there in the community.
Well, furthermore, many people with disabilities don't ordinarily depend on these social service systems. They live independently. I mean, I can say, you know, we're on the edge a little bit, but we manage. And we manage with our home and family, and we manage with our tight-knit family and local social support network. But when disaster occurs, a lot of those systems are upset. So maybe we need social services and assistance that we don't ordinarily need. However, those agencies, first of all, are dealing with their own routine business when they recover, and the clients that they're accustomed to dealing with, they're not prepared for an additional mass of people. We were fortunate at the ILRU program tier and University of Texas Health Science Center School of Health Information Sciences to have many friends who made donations so that we could put together a project that would address the needs of people in both the near and long term aftermath of Hurricane Ike. And we were also fortunate to have a grant from the Greater Houston Community Foundation to assist with that. I think it's going to be a very, very important project. We want to talk some about that. Carlos, you feel like the initial steps that we've taken to identify people have been helpful?
I think so, yes. Very, very effective. The mechanisms are pretty much, as I like to say, where the rubber meets the pavement. And that's the thing that I feel that the community or the city government perhaps sort of lost sight of that. And really, you can't say enough about how well they did. But the fact is the numbers are so overwhelming. Yeah. We're talking about a small country here. You know, we're not talking about just, you know, a couple 100,000 people affected. We're talking about, I believe the numbers over 13 million people affected by the hurricane from here to the shores of Cleveland, Lakes, Michigan, whatever it's called. And you know, so it's a huge, huge undertaking. Yeah. And the fact that the city prepares so well, kudos to that. But also, I think that there is a bit of a, I'm not going to say ignorance, but a bit of inability to grasp that the concept that a person with disability is not just a guy in a wheelchair. It's a lot. It's a broader definition that affects the people, that blind people, older people, that just a lot of people, we don't even know yet what the extent of it is.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what we can do as a community to prepare for the next disaster and what we can do to continue recovering for Hurricane Ike right after this break. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, your host. We're here today with Wendy Wilkinson and Carlos Saez talking about recovery from Hurricane Ike. Wendy, people with disabilities were affected more than probably the general population because, by definition, people with disabilities have extraordinary needs to begin with. Can you just give us some ideas of the ways in which people were affected?
Yes, I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, we're not one homogeneous population, but you have to imagine there's just a complete disruption. People that may depend on personal care assistance to get them out of bed, some of those people had to evacuate. So you can imagine people were left in bed if they didn't have family or other support to get them. I'll give you another example. When we talked about people losing food, well, for somebody on Social Security that has an income of only $625 a month and $400 of that goes to rent, they lose a whole refrigerator full of food. That's devastating for them. So just lives were just completely disrupted. And in addition to that, people that lost their homes, lost employment, had to find another place to live. So they may have lost access to transportation. We're not used to, say, using, if they use public transit, if they move to another place simply by moving there, they may no longer be able to access the fixed route system, because their way to the fixed route may not be accessible to them.
Well, I think that's a big issue. The whole issue of eligibility for these programs. People who are eligible for Medicaid, they move, they don't have an address that people can get to them. Yes. Even people who were eligible for FEMA had to move, and the FEMA inspectors couldn't reach them to go ahead and evaluate their cases. People dropped through the cracks. Some people who were should probably have been eligible for FEMA answered questions wrong when they were asked. I remember one person was asked, where were you at the time of the storm? She said, I was in my car, because she was trying to evacuate, of course. Where were you residing at the time of the storm? She said, I was in my car. She didn't tell them that she had left her home and that her home had been flooded and ruined, so they didn't have that data. They couldn't evaluate her case properly, and they didn't provide her with any benefits. Now, hopefully, we can identify those people and help those people get reconnected with the system to become eligible for the services that they are indeed eligible for. Yes. But many issues, I mean, people lost a lot of medicines. Yes. And they weren't able to keep up with their medications as they should, so some of them had to go to the hospital. Because they had lost their medicines and their prescriptions. They weren't able to get those prescriptions filled, so they couldn't get them even after the pharmacies opened back. Many, many issues that we ordinarily wouldn't think about. Now, what we've tried to do is put up a project, and people can call 800-949-4232. 800-949-4232. That's the number of the Southwest Disability and Business Technical Assistance Center, but people there can also put you in a queue to get information, at least, and perhaps assistance to help recovering from that storm if you have a disability and were affected by Hurricane Ike. That's one possibility. Another thing to do is look on the internet at www.disability911.com. disability911.com on the internet, and you can find up-to-date information there, and also good information about preparing for the next disaster. Carlos, you feel like we're beginning now to get a handle on what some of the issues are. I guess the real problem is probably identifying all the people who need help.
I think so. That is the biggest problem. Well, but the identification is there. There are agencies, there is businesses, they have a list of people that can be identified prior to the catastrophe, if you will. The real issue is getting the resources in place and getting them to the people on a timely basis.
Well, one thing that I know you've done in collaboration with the City of Houston, and really the City of Houston, the Mayor's Office on People with Disabilities, under the direction of Michelle Colvard, has done a magnificent job, beginning almost after the hurricane, to try and coordinate assistance to people with disabilities. The city's been working with us, with the University of Texas Health Science Center, with Tier Memorial Hermann Hospital, to try and pull together resources. And Carlos, you have your own company, Freedom Wheels, which you kind of put at the disposal of this whole effort, and now are in the process of storing and distributing a lot of equipment which has been donated from outside, and that's one of the issues that I think we haven't talked about. There are plenty of great people outside of Houston, outside this region, outside of this state, who want to help, people who have wheelchairs to donate, all kinds of medical equipment and supplies, and we simply have to connect people to them. Now, the city has already taken supplies, and you're storing them and distributing them?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, we have a large inventory of walkers, canes, some reclining chairs, a lot of daily living aids like nebulizers, some diabetes supplies, related supplies, and we're now waiting on a shipment of about, I'm going to say 50, 55 manual chairs that we will be able to, as the needs start coming, we'll probably will have to do some fitting and do some work with the folks. But I think that the people of Houston, the people affected, have shown a magnificent spirit as well in terms of they're so happy to see you when you show up and to just you can see that they're anxious, but the spirit is amazing. Some of the folks that were situated in some apartments as we moved them off the shelters yesterday, they were not the best apartments, but they were so happy to be there. And as we distributed mattresses and recliners, a lot of people will come and say thank you. And I think that that's the spirit of the city. I think that's the spirit of the population of Houston, whether they disabled or not. And really, I have a lot of friends that they have offered their help. They are just very intrigued by what's going on. They never thought that so many people would fall through the cracks, as you said earlier. But at the same time, it's a tremendous effort. The numbers are overwhelming, and the city's doing a very good job of doing so, and we like to continue.
Well, and that's the issue, continuing. I mean, clearly after Katrina and Rita, we learned that there were people with disabilities who would be affected terribly by any disaster, and we failed to do the right kinds of things, before Katrina in particular, to evacuate people with disabilities safely. Now we've learned that lesson, and we evacuated prior to Hurricane Ike people with disabilities, but following the storm now, you know, we weren't prepared entirely for the long-term power outages. People were sheltered in place. Maybe some of them should have evacuated, even though the general population didn't evacuate. We're going to study that question, use the data from this particular event to find out whether we should warn people with fragile conditions to go ahead and evacuate, even though the general population doesn't need to. The most important evacuation zone is the surge zone, which was the question at the beginning of the show. The surge zone is generally along the coast, where the water will typically rise when a hurricane makes landfall, and that zone really is apt to flooding, and people will die if they stay there. They need to evacuate the surge zone. Further inland is the wind zone, where the winds from the storm will hit and affect people. Maybe even in the wind zone where power is subject to going out, people with disabilities should evacuate if they are power dependent. And then, you know, I think we have these lessons. We can apply them to the next disaster. What we're learning now is how to help people recover more quickly. I mean, Katrina was in 2005. It's 3 years later now, almost 4, and people with disabilities are still trying to recover. Many people who were homeless as a result of that storm are still living displaced from their family and friends and away from their community. We don't want that to happen for any other disaster. We shouldn't let it happen for Hurricane Ike. Wendy, we're trying to place people in transitional housing rather than send them to institutions, to nursing homes, and to hospitals, right?
That's correct. That's correct. People need to be able to live with their family in the community, access all the benefits and privileges of society like everyone else, and they don't need to be sent to a nursing home. Often they don't need to be if they have the proper community supports in place. And that's part of the recovery process, is getting those supports back in place, getting people reestablished, getting them eligible for MetroLift, to get transportation, getting them reconnected with personal care assistance, getting them just the basics, food, medications, and other things, so that they can rejoin the community.
Okay. The numbers again are 800-949-4232. 800-949-4232. If you were affected by Hurricane Ike, if you have a disability, or if you know somebody who has a disability who's not able to communicate since the storm, please call that number. We'll do an intake. Carlos mentioned the system we have for getting information about people with disabilities and their needs. We'll try to match those needs with available services, supplies, and supports for people who want to contribute to helping this effort. They can also call that number and we'll direct them the right direction. The website is www.disability911.com. I want to thank all of you for watching today's program. It's been an interesting show for us, and I hope for you as well. We'll continue to follow this story as time passes, and we'll prepare for the next disaster at the same time. I want to thank our guest today, Carlos Saez. Carlos, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for everything you're doing to help people.
Our pleasure.
And Wendy Wilkinson from the Disability and Business Technical Assistance Center. Wendy, thanks for the ADA technical assistance. Thanks for the Hurricane Ike technical assistance.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and to bring attention to the needs of people with disabilities that we're all concerned about here in Houston.
Okay. You've been watching Focus on Abilities. This is a program of the Municipal channel, and we really appreciate their support of this program, and we hope that all of you have enjoyed the show, that you'll tune in next time for more Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden, your host, and come back again.